faith. But this morning I want us to look at what does it mean to step out, to get out of your comfort zone, to do something that just seems extraordinary or beyond your comfort level. And we're going to be looking at one of my favorite disciples, and that's Peter. I like Peter. Peter was one of those kind of disciples where, like, a lot of times he just said whatever came to his mind. Actually, before his mind even engaged, he just spoke a lot of times. But he also had great insight. There's that time when Jesus was talking to the disciples, and he asked them, he says, who do people say that I am? And they said, well, some people say you're Elijah, some say that you're Moses, some say you're John. But Jesus asked them a question, but who do you say that I am? And that's a good question that all of us should be answering. Jesus said, who do you say I am? Without hesitation, Peter said, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, you're right. And this wasn't given to you by man, but by God himself. And upon this rock, this statement, I will build my church. But Peter also is the same one that when Jesus said, I'm going to be going away, I'm going to be leaving you. And Peter says, no, we're going to fight. We're going to fight for you. And Jesus says, look, before the rooster even crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And he did. But Peter's just one of those kind of impetuous type of people that just did what he wanted to do and stepped out in faith a lot of times. And in Matthew chapter 14, where we'll be at this morning, we're looking at an example where it's a story that a lot of us are familiar with probably. It's one that is dramatized a lot. But it's about the time when Peter meets Jesus on the water. And so if you will, in verse 22, beginning chapter 14, let's read along for a little bit here. It says, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. So Jesus had been teaching, and he told the disciples, I want you to get in the boat, go. Go across to the other side. He said he dismissed them, and then after a while, after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountains by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. So Jesus said, I need some quiet time. He got away and spent some time in prayer, some fellowship with his Father. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them. Now, the 4th watch is about 3 o'clock in the morning, because the first watch started at 6 p.m., the second watch at 9 p.m., the third watch was at midnight, the 4th watch was at 3 a.m., and then you started the day over again at 6 a.m. It said, the 4th watch, the night he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. He said, it is a ghost. And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid. So the first thing I think that some principles that we can learn just in this first part of Scripture is this. If you're going to step out in faith, you have to recognize the presence of God. Jesus comes walking to them on the water, traipsing in the water. Now there was a storm going on. There's a gale that was going. Winds were coming up and buffeting. And many of these people in this boat were professional fishermen. They were used to this. They were used to being in a boat, but yet they were terrified. They were afraid. And they saw Jesus walking across, and they did not recognize him and said, it is a ghost. And Jesus said, no, take heart. It's I. It's me. Don't be afraid. He said, don't be afraid. The disciples did not recognize Jesus, but sometimes it takes eyes of faith to recognize when Jesus is around. When Jesus is starting to work in your life, begin to move in your life, you have to have spiritual eyes to be able to discern that, to know that he's in there and he's working, he's got something he would do. Now the question comes this, why would Jesus do it at 3 o'clock in the morning? Why wait till 3 a.m.? Well, according to the Gospel of Mark, it says that he intended to pass them by. In other words, I get this picture of Jesus, they're in the boat, the wind's buffeting, and Jesus just plans on walking by and kind of waving at them. I just kind of figured that's what, according to Mark, that's what it sounds like he had planned on to do. The Greek word for to pass by is the same word that we use, which refers to a theophany, which is where God appears or God reveals himself. And we see some examples of that in the Old Testament. For example, with Moses, when he was up on the mountaintop, he wanted to see God. God says, you cannot see me, because if you do, you will die. He says, go hide yourself in that cleft of the rock. Go hide yourself there as I pass by, so you will not die. And also Elijah met him as well, too, on the mountain. And Jesus intended to reveal his divine presence and his power. He wanted his followers, his disciples, those who were closest to him, to really see who he was. They saw him work. They've seen him work some miracles, some different things, but they wanted him to truly see that he was God. That he was who he said he was. Now, whenever he told them to get in the boat, the disciples, they were obedient, and they entered that boat. But they were about to learn that obedience itself does not protect you from adversity. Just because you're obedient to what God's called you to do does not mean that you will not face adversity. It will happen. It's part of the journey. And you have to recognize that as well, too. But Jesus wanted to teach them a little bit more about the one who was in control. He wanted them to see who they were following and what it's all about. In essence, what he was saying, he said, you can trust me. You know my character. You know my essence now. You know all these things about this and my competence. And just as with the disciples, those divine appointing times come to you and me. There are times when Jesus just steps into our life. He's always there. But there are times when he makes himself known. When you know Jesus is here. He's here to do something. And that Jesus still asks his followers to do extraordinary things. But I'm telling you what, if you're not looking for Jesus, you might just miss him. If the disciples would not have been looking, they would have missed him. But you have to be able to recognize the presence of Jesus. And then look what Peter does. It says, and Peter answered him, after Jesus says, take heart as I, do not be afraid. And Peter answered him and says, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And he said, come. He said, come on. Come on, big boy. Try it out. See what you got here. You see, this is not just a story about risk-taking, but it's also a story about obedience as well. The question is, why didn't Peter just jump into the water? Why didn't he just go, oh, there's Jesus, I'm going to get into the water, I'm going to go to him. But he says, Lord, if it is you, come to me. We have to discern an authentic call of God between a foolish impulse on our parts. There are a lot of times where I think, man, I want to do this, but God isn't in it. And that's just a foolish impulse. And sometimes it may succeed, but we're robbing God of the glory if that's the case, because he wasn't in it. Oh, we could try to say he's in it, and we could try to give him the glory for it, but the reality is if he doesn't call you, it's you. It's all on you. And so Peter recognized that, and he calls out to him. He says, if it is you, command me. I mean, he asked for clarity, for this wasn't some kind of extreme sport, but it's extreme discipleship that was going on here. And I think that as Jesus is standing out there, Peter asking that question, I think Jesus is standing in the dark, I think he's kind of smiling. You go, oh, man, one of them's got it. One of them finally gets it. He's got it. Peter had an idea about what Jesus was doing, but he wanted to be a part of it. So he says, command me. He says, Lord, tell me to come to you. He didn't try to do it on his own. He said, tell me to come to you. So I want you to put yourself in the scene. There's a storm, and there are seasoned professionals in this boat, and they're afraid. And these are the conditions in which Peter's being asked to get out of the boat. I mean, it would be difficult enough if the sun was shining and the waves were calm to step out of that boat. But what would you do? You're at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's a storm going around you, and Jesus tells you to come. What would you do? That's a good question. He's inviting you, Jesus is passing by, he's inviting you to go on the adventure of your life. Which would you choose? Would you choose the safe boat, or would you choose the rough seas? I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you don't get out of the boat, you'll never walk on water. You have to be willing to get out of the boat. So we read the rest of the story here. He says to come, and Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water, and he came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Why don't we get out of the boat sometimes? Why is it we like to sit around there? Something inside of us tells us that there's more to life than just sitting in the boat. My question this morning is this: what is your boat? What is it, that one thing that's keeping you from stepping out? If you really want to know what your boat is, look at where your fear is. Your fear will tell you what your boat is. What is that one thing that's keeping you there? What produces the most fear in you, especially when you think about leaving it out, or leaving it whenever you step out in faith? Those things you're afraid of leaving behind, that's your boat. And being able to step out of that too. But Peter goes to the side of the boat, and while the other disciples watch, he puts his hands on the rail. He puts one foot over the boat, edge of the boat. He puts the other one over the boat. And I can just see Peter just kind of sitting there for a minute. He's looking at Jesus, and he goes, "Okay." And he lets go. And he stands up, and he begins to walk. He does something very religious here. He lets go of that boat. And for a while, it seems that to Peter that he and Jesus were the only people that were in that area. And Jesus is thrilled with what Peter's doing. He's excited. But then it happens. Peter saw the wind. He saw the wind, and reality sets in, and Peter asked himself, "What was I thinking?" You know, a lot of times whenever we step out in faith and God calls us to do something, we reach an adversity, and the first thought we have is, "Why did I do this?" Maybe God truly isn't in this. Maybe it's just me. You were so certain at the beginning that God was in it, then you hit a wall of adversity, and now you're going like, "Why? Why am I doing this? Why am I stepping out here like this?" I mean, the fact of the matter is, the storm has always been there. The storm, I mean, when Peter stepped out, the storm was still there. It's always been there. But what happened was, he took his focus off of Jesus, and he put it on the storm. And whenever we are called to walk with God, to step out in faith, and we take our attention off of God, that's when trouble hits. And we get to focus on the things around us and what's going on. And we all know what it's like to see the wind. When you step out, all of a sudden there are obstacles and setbacks and all kinds of things. And because of the wind, some people decide never to leave the boat, though. Think about it. How many times have I heard this story, and you probably have too, where people was going like, "I think God's calling me to do something." Okay, well, have you prayed about it? Yeah. All right, then do it. Well, I got this, and I got this, and I got this, and I'm not sure about, I don't know what my future looks like, and I've got this. All kinds of obstacles that they throw up in themselves. Get out of the boat. Get out of the boat. Because of that wind, people never decided to leave the boat. In our society, we suffer from risk lock. We're afraid to take risk. We truly are. We're comfortable where we're at. There's a guy by the name of Larry Lawton who studies risk management. He's identified 19 principles to risk management. He said this. He says the first principle says, everything is risky. Once you understand that everything you try to do, there's a risk associated with it, no matter what it is. You may think it's smooth sailing, but trust me, there's a risk that you're going to run into. If you step up to the plate and swing the bat, there's a chance you're going to strike out. It's possible. I mean, even the greatest hitters are only successful 1 out of 3 times. And we consider them great hitters. You know, the chances of you striking out are, it's a good chance of it. But if you don't step up to the plate, you'll never know what it's like to hit a home run. You have to be willing to get up there and take that chance to do it. And there's danger in getting out of the boat, but there's also danger in staying in the boat as well. If you live in the boat, you're going to eventually die of boredom and stagnation. Have you ever seen a pond where there's no fresh water flowing into it? What happens to it? It stagnates. Everything inside of it dies. There's no fresh water coming into it. And if you stay in the boat and you never take that chance, if you never step out, you're going to get bored and you're going to die. Stagnation will set in. So you have to understand that there are risks associated with stepping out. But not only there are risks, there's also some growth that can occur. And that's a part of the story that I don't like very much, and you may not like either. Jesus walking across there, and they see him say, he says, don't be afraid. You know, the choice to follow Jesus, the choice to grow, is the choice to always deal with fear. There is fear in that part. And Peter girds up his loins, though. He asks permission to go overboard. He sees the wind, is afraid all over. He goes, I'm going to try it. You think that's the last time Peter ever faced fear? No, I'm sure there are a bunch of other times as well, too. The truth is, fear will never go away. It's always going to be there. I mean, if I make a choice to grow, it will involve going to new territory, taking on new challenges in my life, something I've never done before, and every time I do that, I will face fear. It's part of who we are. Anytime we run into a threatening situation, there are 2 responses, we're told. Fight or flight. Either you run away from it or you stand up to it and fight it. And Peter decided to stand up to it and decided to fight it. The fear will never, never go away. Fear and growth, they go hand in hand. Theologian Karl Barth, he said this one time. He said, comfort is one of the great siren calls of our age. It's one of the things that leads us to destruction. That whole idea of comfort. I mean, think about the best-selling chair in America. It's not called Risky Boy. It's called Lazy Boy. It is. I mean, we even have terms for we want to immerse ourselves in comfort. We want to veg out. We want to lay around. And Laura and I were kind of talking about that this week. Now that we're both retired, we're kind of doing that a little bit more often than we used to. And so we have to really be careful about that. And of course, I blame it on her, because she'll, and she'll blame it on me, because she'll go like, let's sit and watch a show. I said, okay. And then 2 or 3 shows later, it's time to go to bed, And she goes, well, you could have said no. I said, you're right. I could have. But people who sit in front of the couch and the TV on the couch, are called couch potatoes. I mean, the disciples themselves, they could have been called boat potatoes, actually. I mean, they really could have been. They didn't mind watching what was going on, but they didn't want to actually get out and do it. They were sitting there watching Peter jumping out and walking and then falling and stumbling. But they themselves, they didn't want to get out of the boat. They didn't want to take that chance. Millions of people in our churches today probably could be called pew potatoes. They don't want to do anything either. They want the comfort associated with spirituality, but they don't want the risk and challenge that goes along with it. They don't want to take that chance. And usually what you'll see them there on Sunday, but there's no spiritual growth taking place because they don't take any challenges. They don't take any risk. But let me tell you, every time that you get out of that boat, you're more likely to get out the next time. The fear doesn't go away, but you get used to living with it. You get used to it. The whole idea about stepping out and walking on water and stuff is how to manage failure or master failure. You have to understand how to do that. As a result of seeing the wind and giving into fear, Peter began to sink. So the question is this: did Peter fail? Did he fail? See, failure is not an event, but a judgment about an event. It's not the event itself. It's not something that happens to us. It's a label that we attach to things. That's what that's what failure is. And once we understand that, it helps a whole lot. Jonas Salk, whenever he was developing the vaccine for polio, it wasn't until the 200th attempt that he got it right. And they asked him, "Did you fail?" Before that, he goes, "No, I just found 199 ways not to cure polio." Because he learned, he grew from that, he knew something about that. So was Peter the only one to fail? I mean, his faith wasn't strong enough, his doubts were stronger, he took his eyes off of where they would have been. But I conjecture you there were 11 bigger failures sitting in that boat. They weren't even willing to take that chance and willing to even step out in that case. They failed quietly. Their failure went unnoticed, unobserved, uncriticized. Think about it. When we talk about this story, do we talk about the other disciples not stepping out? No. We always focus upon Peter. Peter being the one. They just sat back there in obscurity, not taking a chance. Hey, if I don't take a chance, nobody's going to criticize me. No one's going to take a shot at me. Nothing's going to happen to me. And they failed quietly. Only Peter knew the shame of public failure, but only Peter discovered two things. Peter knew the glory of walking on water. He knew what it felt like. None of the other disciples did. He alone knew what it meant to attempt something he was not capable of doing on his own and being empowered by God to do it. He's the one that experienced that. Once you walk on water, you will never forget it. Now, I'm assuming not, that I don't think any of us here are actually going to be able to walk on water because we're not in this scenario. But there are other ways in which God calls us to step out and to walk on water. Not physical water, but faith. Be willing to step out there on faith and to follow after that. But Peter also knew the glory being lifted up by Jesus at a moment of desperate need as well too. He knew what that felt like. He knew that when he sank, Jesus would be wholly adequate to save him, to reach up and down and pull him up. The other ones did not know that because they didn't step out of the boat. They didn't take that chance. The worst failure is to never get out of the boat. That's the worst failure of all. If God calls you to do something, step out and do it. If you're not successful, that's not on you. You're being obedient. You're doing what God calls you to do. Be willing to take that chance and step out. We also know in the story, as soon as Peter asked for help, Jesus is there. It says Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him. And he began to, he tells him, he says, "You have little faith, why did you doubt?" See, Jesus was helping Peter grow by pointing to the problem here. He was pointing, he said, this is what it was, this is your problem right here. Jesus wasn't being harsh. He wasn't being critical. He also makes the comment when they were alone on the water. He did not do it in front of the other disciples. He did it with just him and Peter. He didn't want to embarrass Peter in front of the other disciples, but he gently helped Peter locate the source of the problem, which was his lack of faith. And the problem was very clear. I mean, Peter knew what it was. Whether Peter sank or water walked depended on where he was focused. And when he took his eyes off of Jesus, that's when he began to sing. There's that hymn that we sing sometimes, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. And the things on this earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. And I think that's what Peter was experiencing. When he first stepped out, it was just him. And he was focused on that. But even more than to, we hate to fail, we hate for other people to see us fail. We hate for that to happen. Peter put himself in a position to fail, but he also put himself in a position to grow. And failure is an indispensable part of learning and growth. If you don't try it, if you don't fail, you're not going to grow. Sir Edmund Hillary, some of you may be familiar with that name. He was one of the first ones to climb Mount Everest. And he had a lot of unsuccessful attempts in trying to climb Mount Everest. And after one of those attempts, he stood at the base of this giant mountain and he shook his fist at it. He said, I'll defeat you yet because you're as big as you're going to get, but I'm still growing. Willing to take that risk, even understanding that there's going to be failure, you have to be trying over and again. And every time Hillary climbed, every time he failed, he learned and he grew and he tried again until one day he didn't fail. He continued on. But this story is also one about waiting as well, too. You think about it, the disciples had to wait in the storm until the fourth watch before Jesus came to them. So this time they were out there, they're being tossed around. I would have been seasick. I'd be up checking over the boat. Because it happens. For some reason, it's like I can be on some boats, I'm perfectly fine. But I go on some other boats, I get sick. You know, we've been on several fishing trips with members of the church here. We've gone out. But the deep sea fishing trips are the ones that always get me. I don't know what it is. Every time I've been out on one of those deep sea trips, I get sick. Because the waves are rougher. But the fact is, that has nothing to do with what we're doing here, but this is a story about the disciples sitting there waiting in the storm, but it wasn't until the end that they got what they actually wanted, which was relief. They had to wait. And maybe it's because they, like us, we need to learn something about waiting. You know, learning how to wait is a difficult thing. But we have to wait upon the Lord to receive power to walk on the water. In this church, 12 years now? Something like that, 12 years? 13 February. I remember before we used to form the church, Pastor Larry called me up. He said, hey, I need to talk. I want to talk to you about something. I said, okay. So he comes over to the house. We sit around the kitchen table, and he lays out his vision, what he feels God is calling him to do. He said, I want you to be a part of it. I said, well, let me pray about it, which is our standard answer, right? I'm going to pray about it. And so I did. I prayed about it. But actually what I was praying was, Lord, can you find a way for me to get out of this? That's really what I was actually kind of praying. But the more I prayed it, the more God cemented it in my heart. This is where you need to be. Yes. This is where I'm leading. This is where I'm calling you to go. Now, did we have fears? Yes. Did we have failures? Yes. Along with the successes, we've also had a lot of failures. But for every failure that we had, we learned something. And we continued to grow. And there were times, I think, where God had to step in to make us move as well, too. When that hurricane came through, I call that the Great Dispersion. Because we were comfortable in that Y. That YMCA, yeah, we said it, we got our routine down, we're comfortable, everything's going great. I wasn't crazy about setting up everything and tearing it back down every week, but it was, we were comfortable. And then the hurricane came and it got flooded out and we had to move out. Fortunately, God had provided already for us. We had already started construction on this building. We were getting ready, and God said, okay, it's time for you to go now. It's time for you to step out and to move out. But waiting on God sometimes is really difficult to do. And that's the hardest part of the whole thing of trusting. Trusting God, just waiting on Him. Now, that's not the same thing as waiting around. Waiting around is kind of like, okay, I'm just kind of waiting here a little bit. I got other things I can do, and I'll probably go do them a little bit. But waiting, when you wait upon the Lord, it's like, I heard this story one time. A man was talking about his dog that he had. He has an amazing dog. When he would leave in the morning to go to work, that dog was sitting there, right there at the door, watching him as he left. When he came back, that dog was still there, waiting for him to return. He did not move. And I said, are you sure about that? He goes, yeah, we put up cameras. He stayed there the entire time, waiting on his master to return. That's true waiting. And when we wait upon the Lord, it's not like we're thinking about other things and doing other things, but we're waiting for God to do something and waiting for Him to speak. It's putting yourself into utter vulnerability in His hands. And let me tell you something. Jesus is still looking for people to get out of the boat. He's still looking for that. You say, well, why risk it? Well, there are a lot of good reasons why you need to take that risk. One of them is, it's the only way for real growth. To truly grow is to take a risk. It's also the way true faith develops as well, too. If you just sit in the boat, your faith will not develop. I've noticed, and you may have noticed too, those people who are willing to step out and take chances and do things for the Lord, even though it may cost them everything, those are the ones who grow spiritually. Those are the ones whose faith develops. It's also an alternative to boredom and stagnation that will cause you to wither up and to die, but it's a part of discovering and obeying your calling in your life, of God's calling in your life. These are all good reasons, but there's one even better reason. The water is where Jesus is. That's where He is. If you stay in the boat, you're not going to be where Jesus is. The main reason Peter got out of the boat, because he wanted to be where Jesus is. Because Peter got out of the boat, both he and his friends became to a deeper understanding of who Christ was than ever before. See, they understood that the one in the boat was the one alone who treads the waters of the seas, and they worshiped Him, as the Scripture says. So when was the last time you got out of the boat? When was the last time you stepped out of the boat? God's general method of growing a deep, adventurous faith is by asking us to get out of the boat. That's how He does it. There's a book I'm reading now, my son gave me, it's called Deeper. About developing a deeper relationship with Christ and how to do that. There's another one I just recently finished reading called All In. It's about going all in and doing everything, just putting yourself out there and jumping full force into that. And sometimes God calls us to do that as well, too. One of the stories it tells in that book is about a group of men who were going off as missionaries. And they packed everything they had, and they packed it in a casket because they knew they would not be coming back. And whenever they died, they'd be buried in that casket that they took with them. That's going all in. That willingness to step out there and to do that as well, too. We seek a world of comfort because it gives us the illusion that we are in control, but God passes by and He shakes everything up. And there may have been a time in your life, in your past, when walking on water was something you did on a regular basis. But it's kind of gone away. There was a time when you would risk sharing your faith, even if it meant rejection. Giving it meant a sacrifice on your part. You were willing to do it. Sometimes you sank, sometimes you soared. But you lived on the edge of faith. But now maybe you haven't been out of that boat in a long time. Maybe you just kind of been saying, okay, I've done my part. I'm going to take it easy now. That doesn't work in God's economy. He doesn't accept that. I mean, the boat is nice and it's comfortable with padded chairs, but the Lord is passing by and he's looking for people to walk on the water with him. Are you willing to step out and to take that risk? There's a storm out there. All you got to do is watch the news. There's a storm that is out there. And your faith will not be perfect, and risk always holds the possibility of failure. But I want you to know these two things. When you fail, and you will fail sometimes, when you fail, Jesus will be there to pick you up. If you're doing it in his power, he will be there to pick you up. You will not fail alone, and you will find that he is wholly adequate to save you during those times. The other thing is that every once in a while, you will be successful. When you step out, you will walk on water. And you will understand what that's all about.